climactic.
Hello, everybody. It's been a long time. I haven't recorded a podcast in a while. I've been pretty busy doing things, and I'll explain, but let's see. It's so hot right now. I'm just laying on the floor recording on my back, basically with just swim shorts on because it's so hot. I tried to dunk my head in the shower a few minutes ago to try to cool me down, but it worked a little bit, but not a lot. There was one week, a couple weeks ago, where it was like 104 degrees, like every day, and I had to work in the hot sun. It's brutal, man. I don't think when I moved to Utah, I realized how much in the desert it is. It's not like what you think of the desert, but this is more, I think they call it the high desert here. I think that's what it's called. I'm going to do minimal editing on this, so the sound quality is probably not going to be as good as it normally would be. So all 5 of you that listen to this are going to be like, what happened? Tough luck. I guess I do have to edit that out. But yeah, one of the reasons I haven't been recording much recently is because there's been a couple of times where I sat down to record, and so going back to the 2023 year in review, when I started editing that thing, I was kind of going through some winter blahs at the time, which, it's my first time in like 3 years that I've actually dealt with a winter. So, and it kind of caught up with me. And I went back and I listened to that, and I'm like, man, that's pathetic that I moved 2,000 miles away from home just to be that unhappy. So that was kind of like, as I was editing that, I'm like, man, I've got to change some things. So a couple of things happened. I decided I'm such a cheap person. Like, I've got to spend some money and I've got to travel. I moved to Utah to go see, to be close to the national parks. And I finally started doing that. I'd already been to Grand Teton, and what was the other one? I kind of went to, it was early this year, actually. My friend went to Vegas, and she wanted me to come visit her. And so on my way back, from Vegas to Salt Lake City, I stopped by Zion, and then I went to Bryce Canyon. And yeah, I think people joked during the Super Bowl week. It's like, it literally rained in Vegas like all week leading up to the Super Bowl. Imagine it raining all week in the desert. The Super Bowl was inside, so it didn't matter, but man, that Reliant Stadium or whatever it's called where the Vegas Raiders play, I'm a Broncos fan, so I shouldn't say nice things about the Raiders, but man, that stadium is incredible. My friend needed to get a plane flight from Vegas to Ohio, and I took her to the airport at like 3, 4 a.m. So there I found myself at like 3, 4 a.m. with, getting ready to go back to Ohio, or getting ready to go back to Salt Lake, and which is like a 5-6 hour drive, I think. Can't remember exactly. But I'm like, well, before I leave, I kind of wanted to see this sphere because I'll probably never go back to Vegas. It's never been a bucket list item of mine to go to Vegas. I had a completely different impression of what it was going to be like than what it actually is. I had this like sleazy, scummy, dark, and all about gambling, all about strippers and stuff like that. I thought that's what it was going to be like, and that's not what it is anymore. I think maybe it used to be. And so that impression that people have of Vegas, or that at least that I had of Vegas, maybe other people don't, is that it's kind of still got that old reputation, and it really doesn't. It's a very, very nice city now. Yeah, and there are, half-naked women walking around everywhere, which is, I'm not complaining, but just for the most part, it's pretty family-friendly now. It's very expensive. But on the way back, I stopped by Zion National Park, and it was raining still, but I was still able to drive around. You really don't need to get out to see how beautiful it is. You do need to get out to like see some of the more spectacular stuff, I think. I don't even think that's true. I think you have to get out to explore a little more, but you still can see the spectacular stuff from your car. So I just basically drove through it. I think I did go on a couple of short hikes while I was there, but for the most part, I really just didn't didn't want to get out in the rain and walk around. But I went there before, I went back just last month with family. They came out to visit me. And it was not a fun experience either time, because this time when I went back in the summer, it's like peak season for tourism. I had to, we had to ride buses the entire time, shuttles, and you just really couldn't see anything from them. And I remember driving through that area and seeing just how beautiful everything was through my front window. And it wasn't the same experience. But the second time we did actually get out and walk around a little bit, which was pretty cool. But on that Vegas trip, I guess I was back in February. It was raining at Zion. And the lady told me, hey, if you keep driving, you'll get to Bryce Canyon. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep going then. See two things in the same day. But what she didn't tell me is that Bryce Canyon is at 8,000 feet. And when I got there was a blizzard. The rain, basically when you're up at higher altitude, rain turns to snow. And this was a wicked, wicked blizzard. Like I was the only person in the park. And they're like, you can go in, but you're not going to see anything. And I did go in and I didn't see anything. But I mean, I'd traveled all that way. It's like, I might as well, right? But I went back to Bryce Canyon when my family came to visit as well. So, oh man, I'm watching the Olympics and these girls are crying because they scored so poorly. I shouldn't be laughing at that. I'm a horrible person. They're French though, so they deserve it. What was the movie? What was the saying? I was like, the French would rather eat and make love with their faces than go to war. I think the French are like the most fun people to hate because they're still white, so you can get away with it. Nobody's going to say, you racist. I don't know. I've known some French people that I couldn't stand. I've known some French people that I love too, so. But I think that there are a higher percentage of unlikable people from France. But anyways, so going back, I was listening to that 2023 year in review, and I wasn't happy with myself. So it's like, I'm changing things. And I think in that 2023 year in review, I said, I'm just going to stay where I'm at until I leave for Ohio. And I thought, you know what? I really don't want to spend the money to move, and it cost me a lot of money to move, but I'm like, I can't spend the last 6 months of my time in Salt Lake City living in a terrible environment. I promised myself that I wouldn't do that ever again, because it's just, being around miserable people can really ruin your life. And again, I just promised myself that I would never let other people ruin my life again. So I just sucked it up and I spent a lot of money to move. And now I live in a place that I like a lot better. And I chose a place that basically built like a fortress because I honestly believe that it would be perfect for podcasting, because I've got just like cinder brick walls, thick cinder brick walls. Like if there's a tornado, I don't even know if they have tornadoes in Utah, but if there was a tornado here, this would be the place to be. So I thought, oh, this is going to be the perfect place to podcast. And I'm like, okay, it's going to be much easier to podcast here than it was at the last place. And I got here and I started to record a podcast a couple of times, and there's a pool outside of the place. And apparently whatever they used to fill the pool, like the water, like the spigot or the water supply, is right outside of my bedroom. So I was just constantly getting this, and I'm like, there were a couple times I sat down to record podcasts and I just had to stop. It's like, could you guys please do this at another time? But they had to fill up an entire pool, so it took hours. When I first moved here, I heard, I'm like, what is that? And I look out my window and I didn't see anything. I'm like, is there a duck outside of my bedroom? And I woke up in the morning and I looked out there and there was a duck inside the pool. And I don't think they cleaned it after the duck was in there. So I have not been tempted to go inside the pool. The dirty duck pool. Probably pooped in there a million times. Ugh, it's so stupid. Like I wouldn't get in a pool that once had a dirty duck in it, but I would absolutely go swimming in a pond. It makes no sense whatsoever. I'm such a weird germaphobe. Like some things should bother me much more than they do, and other things should bother me much less than they do. I once had a girlfriend who poured us a drink, and I'm like, well, did you get me one? And she goes, well, I thought we could share this one. I'm like, well, I said, you were just drinking out of it. And she's like, Caesar, you realize we just got done making out, right? It doesn't make any sense what I'm weirded out by and what I'm not. But I'm not going in the dirty duck pool, no matter how hot it is. There was one week where it was like 100 plus degrees, like all week long. It's brutal. And, you know, the thing about living in Florida in the summertime was like the worst time to live in Florida because it was just hot all the time. And I didn't want to be outside, so I just spent a lot of time inside. And it would rain every day, just for a couple of hours. So it would be hot during the day. It would rain in the afternoon, in the late afternoon. And then it would cool down at night. In Ohio, summertime is the best time. Like summer in Ohio is incredible, I think. A lot of people complain that it's too humid, but it never really bothered me. I just love I love the warmth. We'll see what it's like when I go back. When I lived in Nashville, springtime and fall were the best. And I'd say the same thing about at least where I lived in Florida. Springtime and fall were perfect. But in Utah, like there are no clouds anywhere, like for like a month at a time. It's just like unrelenting sun. And I look at my skin and it's like, man, I need to get a lot less sun, but I work outside, so it's hard not to. It's hard to get less sun, I guess I should say it that way. But yeah, back to the 2023 year in review. I just was editing that and I'm like, dude, you turned into a loser. So I moved. And then I'd already been to Grand Teton and Zion and Bryce Canyon. So I had a lot more to do though. So the first thing I did was I went to Arches and Canyonlands. And man, that was, I don't know if it was because of the first one I did, at least this year, no, I don't think it's because it was the first one. I think those were my favorite. I ended up going to Grand Canyon last, but I would 100% go to Arches and Canyonlands long before I'd ever go to Grand Canyon. I wasn't really excited about going to Grand Canyon. It was actually family that took me there because I'd heard people say that they've gone to Grand Canyon and they saw it and they were like, okay, I saw it, time to go. And that always drove me nuts to hear them say that. I think I've heard multiple people say it. Like, yeah, it's impressive, but not really. and so I always had that in mind. And so I think it was like the last one that I wanted to do. And it was basically the last one I did. And really the reason I probably would have gone anyway, but the reason I went was because my family wanted to go. And it's kind of my pet peeve too, when people live somewhere really cool and they don't explore the local things. Like, I was talking to a guy who was from New York City, born and raised in New York City. That was when I lived in Nashville. And he said to me once, he goes, I've lived in New York my whole life, and I haven't gone to see the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building once. And he said it like he was proud of that. And I kind of get it. You don't want to be around the tourists. But at the same time, it's like, dude, you are right there at this place that everybody wants to explore, and you take it for granted. And I've met some people out here in Utah like that too. It's like, do you realize what you're surrounded by? You're surrounded by some of the most incredible national parks. And some people will be like, I've just never been, like, it's like maybe 3, 4, 5 hour drive, depending on which one you go to. And same thing. A friend came up to me and he's like, I've never been to Canyonlands. I'm like, really? You grew up here and you've never been to Canyonlands? He goes, I'd go down, but it just costs a lot. And I mean, I guess it kind of does, but not that much if you do it cheaply. I don't know, man. The way I travel, I go cheaply. I mean, since I'm basically going solo on a lot of these trips, I can go down, get a hip camp. I could probably go on BLM land, but I haven't really. That's not Black Lives Matter. That's Bureau of Land Management, where I'm told that you can just go there and you can just set up a tent for free as long as you don't need, bathrooms and water and I don't know, just amenities, electricity, things like that. which is basically what I do at hip camps. I mean, so I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with what a hip camp is. I think somebody taught me that when I was living in Florida. It might have been Eli, who I've had on the show. I can't remember exactly who told me about it. But, I mean, somebody has a piece of land and they're like, hey, I'll let you stay here for, $30 or something like that, and as compared to a hotel, which would be like, 100, 200, 300, whatever. And so, like, any chance I get, I just get a hip camp, and that's what I do when I'm traveling. So the biggest expense is, if I get a rental car, that's a big expense, but it's 3 or 4 or 5 hours. It's not a huge long trip. The biggest expense is the fuel and then the hip camp. And I got one national park pass for the entire year, so I really didn't need to, continually buy entry fees. So they call it the Utah 5 here in Utah, of course. Bryce Canyon, Canyonlands Arches, Zion, and what's the other one? Capitol Reef, which is neither a capital or a reef, but there's a story behind it. Apparently there's a rock inside Capitol Reef that looks like the U.S. Capitol. And then it did used to be a reef. Apparently, I didn't know this until I lived out here. Apparently there used to be a ocean in Utah, which is wild. Like, it's hard to know what to believe, but I mean, you see things out here that you don't see anywhere else, like just the layers of rocks. Oh, one of the other, let me finish that thought before I move on to the next thing. The layers of rocks really, you can get the same experience at Grand Canyon, but I noticed it. I found it more fascinating at Canyonlands, where you can just see the different color rocks, and you start to realize, wow, the Earth is really, 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 really old. This took a while to happen, And then see the petroglyphs and the fossils. So the other one that I went on was Yellowstone. And that one was pretty freaking cool too. I went right before Memorial Day, so it was like late May. And dude, it was snowing there. It's late May. I went to 3 different places like in a month. And the reason was because I had to keep getting rental cars. And I'm like, well, I have the rental car. After somebody destroyed my old car at the old place, somebody broke into my quote unquote new car here. And so I had to get it fixed, and there was damage to the actual vehicle. So they gave me a rental car. And so I'm like, hey, I got a rental car. I'm going on some trips. I went out to the Salt Flats just west of Salt Lake City, which is about, 2 hours away. And you get out of the car and at this rest stop out there, and you can just walk around, and the ground is literally made of salt. It's just west of Salt Lake City and Salt Lake. The fact that the Salt Lake is made of, is salty, and the fact that the Salt Flats are right there too is not a coincidence, if that makes sense. But it's weird to walk on salt. I mean, it's as if dirt was beneath you, but it's literally just made of salt instead. And it just feels weird to walk on. There's so many places out here. It's just like being in a foreign planet, another planet, like what you would think of as Mars, especially Canyonlands. Again, Canyonlands and Arches were by far my favorite. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Delicate Arch, but it's basically on every Utah license plate. And that was really, really cool. It was actually, you could either go to this like easy hike and see it from afar, or you could walk up to it in person and just see it like up close. But that was a hard hike, and there were a lot of older people doing it. I was kind of surprised. So Yellowstone was ridiculous. I went to see Old Faithful and I just walked around. But apparently Old Faithful isn't as faithful as they say it is. Like, I always just assumed it goes off every 15 minutes or something like that. But it's on a weird schedule. They can kind of predict when it's going to erupt. And it was never at a time where I was around it. And I'm like, I'm not staying an extra day just to see the Caeser explode. I mean, I guess I always wanted to see it because I learned about it when I was a little kid. But I also always wanted to see Salt Lake too. And when I got here, it barely exists anymore. Because of 2 reasons. Because of overpopulation and I don't know what drought, like 15 years of drought or something like that. There's just not much. There's not much water in the lake anymore. Oh, and I also went to Antelope Island, which is on Salt Lake. It's like mountains over the lake, which is pretty cool. But I got bitten by mosquitoes so badly that they didn't go away for a month. The bites didn't go away for a month. And I went to this place called Goblin Valley State Park too, and both were ridiculous. Goblin Valley is kind of they got these things called hoodoos. They also have them in Bryce Canyon National Park. And it's just ridiculous to see them. It's like they've got these skinny vertical rocks with a gigantic ball-shaped rock on top of it. I'm not sure what to compare it to, but it's like a piece of architecture that just naturally happened. And it's ridiculous that they exist. And then they have these things called needles where they're kind of like hoodoos, but not as complex. Rocks just go straight up into the air. I don't know, man. It's been a pretty amazing year so far. I probably will revisit this in the 2024 year in review, but there's a lot more 2024 stuff to talk about. It's been a kind of a crazy year as predicted so far. I don't think I'm going to get into that into this episode. But yeah, Yellowstone, absolutely ridiculous. How much wildlife there was there. I think I saw a wolf and some coyotes, and bison would just walk along beside your car. Like a whole herd of bison would. It's like, I don't want to be around these things. They're going to like get mad at me and they're going to blow up my car, you know? So it's like a kind of uncomfortable, but I mean, they were just everywhere. Bison. I think I saw one wolf. I saw a grizzly kind of off in the distance, but I had my telephoto lens, so I got a pretty good photo of it. I saw a few different, I think I saw brown bear and a black bear too. I'm not sure exactly. One of them was definitely brown. What other animals did I see? I don't know. Probably too many to. There was just one road that was just filled with. I asked the guy. He goes, "If you want to see wildlife, go up on this northern road and up in, I think it was in Montana." And so I went up there, and he was right. There were animals everywhere. It was absolutely insane. I still have yet to see a moose or a bear up in the mountains. And I don't. I'd like to see a moose. I don't want to see a bear. I mean, it's different being by your car, which is what I was, you know. You just pulled the car off to the side. Ooh, grizzly bear up there, you know. If he starts to attack, I'll just jump back in the car and drive off. But if, you know, I'm up on a mountain and I see a bear out in the woods, it's like, uh-oh. I've yet to see one. I think it's because I'm probably noisy. They don't really want to mess with humans, and they probably hear me being loud, and then they just go away. Same with alligators. When I was down in Florida, they told me, it's like, you know what, they really don't want to mess with you. And they weren't wrong. Like, there was that one time where I was with some other dude and he just like walked right around an alligator when there was no space to go. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to go around too. Like an idiot. And, gigantic alligator, I think I probably was within 5 or 10 feet of him, and he just watched me walk by. I think that was my favorite part of Yellowstone, was the animals. Oh, and the paint pots. They have these things called paint pots where they're, so you walk around and there's just all this hot steam and boiling water. Like, and if you fall in this stuff, you're going to be hurting for a long time. I remember when I lived a long time ago, when I lived back in Ohio, I was working with a girl who was a ranger at Yellowstone once. And she said she watched a guy say, "I bet it's not that bad." And he dipped his hand into the boiling water and he pulled it out, and like all of his skin was falling off. And I always remember that story. And when I got to Yellowstone, I just thought about that the entire time. Like, it would screw you up if you fell in one of those things. And the paint pots were just kind of like this mud that was boiling. It's hard to explain. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it. I could look it up, but I'm not going to. But, I mean, I basically have crossed off my bucket list all the things that I wanted to do here. And so I've got a couple more months before I return back to Ohio. My original intention was to stay in Florida for 1.5 years and then move to Colorado for 1.5 years. The intention was to go to Tampa for 1.5 years and then Denver for 1.5 years. And I ended up going to Jacksonville first, and I stayed there for 15 months before I got laid off. And then I moved out to Salt Lake City instead of Denver. And it's been pretty cool. I talked to a guy recently who lived in Denver before he moved to Salt Lake City, and he was from the East Coast. And he said, you know what? Salt Lake City is what people think Denver is. And that was a cool thing to hear, because his reason for saying that was like, just the mountains are closer in Salt Lake City than they are in Denver. Because when you live in Denver, you have to drive an hour or two to get to the mountains. But in Salt Lake City, it's just right there. I can get to the mountains in probably 20 minutes from where I live. And I live pretty far to the west side of Salt Lake City, and the mountains are to the east mostly. At least the ones that you can climb. Just a couple of weeks ago, I climbed Mount Olympus again, the big mountain. I think it's a 4,000 feet incline. I've done it twice now. And the reason I'm so obsessed with it is because I can see it from where I live. You can basically see it from anywhere inside Salt Lake City, I guess. And it's just very unique looking. And I'm like, I need to go there. And the entire time I'm climbing the thing, I'm like, why am I doing this? But then when you get to the top, it's like, this is so cool. What an accomplishment. The last time I went, I was at the top of Sunset, and it did not occur to me that it would take 4 hours to get back down. So I didn't get back to the trailhead until 1 a.m. It was absolutely ridiculous. I was so tired by the end, and I hurt so bad the next day. It's so much effort to climb up those mountains. But anyways, I guess the long story short of this is, so far 2024 is going much, much better than 2023 was. And I kind of feel like I stopped recording after doing that 2023 year in review. And it was such a bummer of an episode. But I don't know, just recording it inspired me to have like a really awesome year in 2024 so far. And things are better. I live in a better place. I deal with a lot less idiots. All right, that's it. Later. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com. TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic. Or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.